Yeah, so it's been multidimensional. So I went 7 months, the start of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
straight of no ejaculation, um, no wet dream. That was
Right.
long. That's the longest I've been, probably since I was like a child.
Mm-hmm.
So that I could see it. I could see like the momentum. You know what I mean? Like the
Right.
intensity of the energy and like the consistency of that. Like I always talk about like that sun in the heart, like a blissfulness, like
Mm.
a radiant sun. It would just get bigger and bigger, and it would consistently last for like days and weeks even. So then when I ended up ejaculating, then it kind of like kind of dropped,
Mm-hmm.
like especially for that first day because it was the first day in a while and it was like a huge drop, and then even into the next day it was like about a day and 3/4
Mm-hmm.
that I was like, oh man. And then I couldn't. Well, it wasn't I couldn't access that bliss in the heart as much, but I could see it like it was taking a while
Mm.
to kind of come back, you know.
Right, to build up again.
Yeah, and then that's where I started seeing just like dips in moods and emotional swings. There was still this clear seeing, like a clear knowing of the self throughout all of it.
Right.
That that never shifts, but but it doesn't mean there still can't be like pain and challenge, you know.
Mm.
So then I went through the couple days where it was just off, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, I'm not sure if I started urine therapy. No, I didn't. It was later. So I started building up again.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started going through a few cycles after that, like every month, because usually around, because in my view, well, it's not my view, but it's the idea of men like menstruating
Yep.
on the kind of moon cycle, definitely see that because I would only have wet dreams. The only time I would be cognizant of a potential wet dream coming would only be on new moons or full moons.
Mm.
And it would almost always happen. And that's also a product of there's interference in the new moon, full moon times because entities can enter the realm easier. So they can
okay.
become more, like just more involved in the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what it would happen. It would be in the form of a female, or I usually wouldn't see like a physical entity, but I knew there was a weird energy there,
Mm-hmm.
and it would manifest as the image of some female as fantasizing about,
Right.
and then
Wow.
have sex with them in the dream.
Wow.
So that's typically known as incubus and succubus, or incubi and succubi. That's like a typical perspective. I think that's even in the Bible actually.
Okay.
But it's a typical known idea about those types of entities that are sexually based.
Mm.
They feed off the release of that power that you have, right?
Okay. Right.
So what happened was then I was going through that for a couple months where every month I could only last a month and it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I started training was, okay, because when you're dreaming, you're having sex, you kind of see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would start to do is I'd be aware of what was happening in the dream, but I'm like, okay, I'm too late, I can't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just release, I would just surrender and let everything just happen. I would enjoy the orgasm, even though when you start feeling like the open heart and like the blissfulness and the whole being, the release of an orgasm here is just so like insignificant. You're just like, you literally just see this, like the way I perceived it was this energetic ball that just like expanded here and then just contracted. And you're like, like I just wasted like all my energy for that, like
Right.
it was just so weird. And then but not weird at all really. But I started practicing just having a completely silent and clear mind
Okay.
when it happened.
Mm.
And that's actually a practice in Black Tantra, because there's black, red, and white Tantra. People don't usually know these different sections, and black and red Tantra usually have a more negative viewpoint, but it's more because you're dealing with more mechanical or kind of like occult practices, like rituals and things, which definitely is not always negative,
Mm-hmm.
but it can more easily lead that way because you're easily more tempted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're dealing with different energies in the tantric kind of perspective. But one of the practices in that is that if you are to orgasm, you would have no intent, like nothing in your mind. Like you would get as clear as you can, or you would have a loving intent, to move that energy in a positive way. So if you can do that, then you can actually deal with the repercussions of the downturn, which will come the next day and a half,
Okay.
of like so what I noticed was in those wet dreams, if I just completely allowed it to happen, I wouldn't feel, like you're saying, like I wouldn't feel any downturn. And if I was fasting and also doing juice, my energy levels would stay pretty consistent.
Well, I wouldn't feel any. The beautiful thing is when I'm fasting or juicing, it's more. It's like I'm not even a man anymore. Like,
yeah.
like,
No
like a
urges.
girl.
No urges.
No.
Well, there's different elements to that, right?
And almost to the extent like sometimes, like girls will give me like signs, but it wouldn't even clue in because I don't have these urges.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that is important because there's many elements to that. Obviously, the food's aggravating, or not aggravating, but igniting. You know, the different elements in the body. You know.
Yep.
The fire element, all that, and
yeah.
getting that sexual energy moving, because it's all the same. And also too, like if you eat big meals and you start swelling up the colon's pressing against the prostate.
Right.
Which
that's
then,
gonna swell. Okay,
yeah,
makes sense.
So, so yeah, I totally relate with that. But even still, like even when I would go into deep and fasts, and like juicing and stuff, I'd still notice that there would be energy like that was still there, you know, or it could be ignited in some form. It just wasn't as intensive. And then, so then what I started recognizing was like I had already clearly come to the understanding that like sex, money, food were all kind of very connected, and breath. But there's different like levels to the game in a sense. Like there's different stages, or there's different energetic repercussions of each.
Okay.
So the way it was kind of more logically making sense at the time was, okay, the consequences of energetically enmeshing myself with like say a female in a sexual dynamic are the repercussions in any way, or the energetic, you know, exchange is much more intense than if I go eat like a bag of chips. You know what I mean? Like if you eat the bag of chips, like sure, you may activate things. It may not be like the best for the fasting. You may have acid, whatever. But the energetic repercussions are far smaller than like if I'm going to let this energy move in a direction of like, you know, interacting sexually with someone that I may or may not be like absolutely aligned with, but it fulfills that energy movement, and it may be very beneficial in some sense. But there's a lot of other elements that are gonna like come down to that. You like be interacted there, you know.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, well, this is all a game of balancing these different meters then, because if I'm having very intensive sexual urges and the energy's really moving, then and I could help alleviate that by going and not fasting as long, you know, maybe eating a bit and kind of dampening that energy a little bit, or moving my energy and like dancing or breathing, you know, or doing something creative, then I have to consider that before like just letting this sexual thing take over. Right, which would manifest as, you know, like any sort of like self-pleasuring or fantasizing, or actually acting on some of those fantasies and engaging like a female or something like this, you know.
Yeah.
So when I started playing with that, it made so much more sense, because then I was easier on the fasting space, where I could be more fluid, where if like I feel like I need to eat, I will eat. If I don't feel like eating, I won't put pressure there. So then that became more fluid, and then the same thing was happening with money at the time. And then the sex element was also manifesting, is that because I'm like, okay, well, if I'm interested or I'm feeling this energy, I'll let it move, but I'm not going to resist. I'm not going to, because I'm not resisting and I'm not pushing against it, it's not as intense, you know? It's not wanting to release. It's not wanting to like take over and have a wet dream, or, you know, wanting to have that orgasm or that, you know? So that's where it started really balancing, and that gave me even more awareness in the dream time, where I could catch things before they happen, where like if a female sex started happening in a dream, I could stop it. Or I could, or because I was like working with that energy like in real life, I could actually have the sex without the orgasm in the dream.
Wow.
So it wouldn't release, you know?
Right.
So I'm basically speaking all the way up to now. That's basically what's been happening, where I'm pretty cognizant of the energies on all the levels. And this is also how I interact with, you know, the opposite sex like in real time, where I'm not I'm very clear, or I'm very cognizant of where the energy is going, or like how much I want to engage. You know what I mean, and not rushing it or going too fast or like letting things be, more like more natural. So I'm not. So I know that I'm not because I'm. I think what's happened is there's been more of a threshold that's been experienced of seeing like what could life be like without ejaculating.
Mm.
But then not resisting sex. Sex is still in the equation. It's still an
Right.
option.
Right.
But is there a possibility to actually engage in that without ejaculating? Unless I decide that that's what I would want. Like it being a choice, not a compulsion.
It being a choice, not that you're like forced to.
Yeah, or like
Okay.
a compulsive reaction to urges.
Right,
Desires,
right. But how do you manage those like those compulsions or urges or desires?
Well, it's this whole process. It's this whole process of awareness of recognizing the dance between all of the different dimensions
And
of.
the time with it, with the moon and stuff like that.
I'm not even so cognizant of that, other than the fact that like if it is moon time, I mean I do it every night, but moon time's about like I'll make sure that there's a kind of a protective energy, like I'm cognizant, like I'm just constantly bringing awareness to it, so things can't kind of like come out of the shadows, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean sure they can, but there's always a willingness to kind of see it and explore. So now it's been. I don't know the time. I think it's been about 5 months this time, 4 months maybe, I'm not, because there's no fantasies. Then it's not about the same thing anymore. It's about how are you moving then the energy upwards. Because there
it's
is
no longer about the releasing. It's more about the moving of the energy.
Yeah, the cultivation, right? Because now it's like I can experience these like kind of like full body orgasms without any real orgasm even happening, like what we typically think of as an orgasm, right?
Right.
Because that is a bit of the difference between traditional like neo tantra, like Montauk Chia type tantra, which is very much about separating ejaculation and orgasm, which I've experienced before, but it's quite a difficult thing to do because you really got to build up and then learn how to hold in the energy, and it gets really like mechanical, and I find it's not as fluid as just like having a consistent flow of this blissful energy that doesn't really ever have this like climactic peak, but it's this consistent building that keeps occurring. And then and that even then when done with a partner, you'll find that you don't even have to actually even take the clothes off. You can literally just be like cultivating energy together with their clothes completely on. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't even have to be any sort of like penetration or physical, like as intense of a physical thing.
Right.
And if there is, then it's more of a form of this kind of like very gentle kind of like cultivation energy rather than this, more
intense and
fantasy based kind of porn scene,
Right.
So that's taken a long time. I gotta say, it's been a long time that this has been that I've worked on that element, because it only really, I felt like it turned the curve over the past couple months where I really started, because I started really being able to feel the cultivation up the spine and like moving through the energy.
Okay.
Where I'm like, it almost makes the self-pleasuring actually redundant.
Right.
You're like, why? You can see how you're just kind of still playing into that kind of lower energy, but it's actually helpful. It's like why we still eat, Like,
right.
okay, yeah, you can be fasting and breatharian, but if you just try and go in all in that, it's just too strong of a desire,
Yeah, too much too soon.
Yeah, so I don't have anything really against the idea of anything actually in regards to it, but I do see that like the cultivation of the non-ejaculation form is just far superior than anything else, at least when it comes to relative well-being and energy and that type of thing, right? But yeah, it's all around like awareness, balancing the energy, moving the energy, which comes down to like how you're moving your creative stuff throughout the day, like engaging and stuff, and then the food's a big one too. I mean, if I was eating a lot heavier, maybe it may be a bit of a more challenging or a different story. That could be.
I also find like the types of food.
Well, that's like spicy or that
There's just certain foods that when I have them, I'll wake up the next day and I'll just feel like this, almost like that pornographic animalistic urge
Yeah.
to like ejaculate.
Yeah, that's, I mean, because even the idea of like the typical blue balls or buildup or all that, I couldn't see that happening from this vantage point, like, because I remember at times having that and being able to move the energy out. It just took a while, and that was like versus previous times where the only way was to just release.
Right.
You know, so that's definitely an interesting like dynamic, but I mean overall, yeah, the ability to move the energy I think is helpful, but particularly just the awareness of like how the desires are manifesting, and then yeah, how you're playing that out in the day to day. You know, like if you're if you're still indulging in the fantasies or you know the engagements, say with like the attractive sex or whatever, and there's like a lot of movements there, then it's gonna kind of keep building and feeding the fire of that fantasy. You know, which can be nice. It could be it could be kind of enjoyable because there's like this flirtatious like exchange that's there, but it does limit, and like we said, it can fog the
vision.
Yeah, the vision and like the development of a true bond or a true like intimate kind of like you know connection, friendship or whatever, right?
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, there's definitely be a big shift this year that I've seen, that like again the perspective of like how to, well, it just comes down to just at a certain point in our life, in so many respects of what we engage in, there comes the clarity that like we're not interested in this anymore. You know what I mean? Or we're not, or this will not provide what we.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
That's the only really real way that it can happen, and that comes down by like doing it and like mistakes or whatever, and then.
I found a big thing with fasting actually is that there was no longer this drooling or like captivation that women have over me anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when you like whatever, see like a big booty girl on Instagram or something, and you're just like, oh my god, like this just, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I the other element too, which isn't really a popular discussion, is in regards to like entities and stuff.
Okay.
Because I was speaking about this idea of entities in the dreams, which is very very real. Of like because anytime I'll say this for like anyone watching this or like engaging in this type of discussion, anytime there's an uninvited guest sexually in the astral or dream plane, this is not for you. Like it's not like it's not like it's an astral rape in a sense. Like that's like literally what's happening most of the time. It is a product of your subconscious desires manifesting.
Right.
But you have a being that's feeding upon that.
Right.
And that's what's resulting.
How do you like identify entities or?
Well, I mean, first like.
Them?
Well, there's just a sense. There's just a sense to it. I'm not gonna say all sex dreams are that, but I would say like a good portion of them are, and I would also say that like, and then even more so if it's more of an astral interaction where you're conscious, you're not dreaming, you know, and there's some sort of sexual thing, because that's just not like spiritually hygienic. That's kind of like what I'll say about that. But you'll have a feeling, you'll have a clear sense that there's something off. It's a very sucking energy. You know, it'll be very difficult to be able to control the ejaculation because there will be that sucking energy. It'll be so powerful. Right. And like I was saying in the dream recently, where you know, females that I know or specific, you know, women that represent a certain symbology in my head, say from the past or whatever, they appear and they come, and you know what I mean. Like it's a very interesting kind of dynamic there. But the other way that I saw this is, so one element, like say with pornography, that is talked about in the kind of spiritual community, is that there's astral entities in the pornography videos because they're feeding off of the energy in the film, and many times attached to the people that are engaging in the act, right? So when you watch it, you're literally being sucked by and interweaving your energies with these people. Like if you think about that, it makes so much sense. The intensity of the sacredness of a sexual union of two beings coming together, and now you're watching it. You are literally engaging in that with them.
Right. I've always thought about that in a sense, like if porn wasn't a thing, right, and it wasn't this thing that really like people do or like as popular as it is or whatever, it would be so weird to just watch people do that. You know what I mean?
It's so true. Yeah. It literally is that.
Right? You wouldn't just watch people have sex. You'd just be like, oh, sorry, I walked in. I'm just gonna go somewhere else. You know, like, my bad.
Oh my god, you're so accurate. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. So I mean, we don't even have to get into like the deep stuff. It's literally just like the common sense of it all. But
right.
But I mean, with that in mind, with these kind of entity feeds, like they're literally like feeding frenzies. You're engaging with that. You're getting kind of like tagged in a sense.
Right.
And so I had an experience actually recently where I was on Instagram and I saw one of these females you're speaking of, and and then I clicked on the picture. And the moment I clicked on the picture, I instantly felt like like an energy and entity like up in my higher like chakra area. It was almost instant, and I'm highly in tune and aware of like what's going on in my energy. So it was so clear to me. It was so clear to me. It's like almost like a spider attaches to your energetic field, right? And I'm like, it was just so obvious. Like I turned it off like around like man like, and then I had to deal with that and basically dissolve it, but it was just so clear. I'm like, yes, like you literally have through the interdimensional field of just looking at your screen this interaction that's occurring with the lustful kind of feeding frenzy of the sexual energy that so many of the entities that exist feed off of,
right?
So yeah, it's such a complex discussion, but I think again, the more you come into like a pure intention, and even if when it comes to interacting with humans, we have like a pure intention behind how the interaction or what this is, and what is the energy that we have, and what do they have, and what is coming together here? You know what I mean? That's why it's so important to know somebody deeply before that happens, because taking in them and they're taking in you, and it's like so so I think that's probably part of the reason why it's become so much easier, because that element has become more and more clear. So it's like, okay, well, even if I am fantasizing about something in particular, there isn't going to be an action on that fantasy, which is actually a product of a part of my human design. Actually, you may have the chance. It'd be interesting to look at yours, but there is literally a gate I have that's all about fantasizing, and how, and which has been much of my experience in life, where part of that element of experiencing something is just in the fantasizing, not necessarily in the doing. The fantasizing can be enough, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So that can be in a light and a shadow side, obviously.
Yeah.
But when you start to understand the human
in a way, it's so like simple. It's like, instead of having a date, you just fantasize about having a date, and you're like, all right, I'm full. Like,
well, that's how I survived my 40-day juice fast, where I was like watching pizza reviews,
right?
And I could literally taste it in my mouth. I'm like, wow, this is enough. Like, I can do it.
Yeah. Wow. Nice.
But yeah, it's a big discussion overall. I think for males, it's such an important one though, because it's like if all of us, I mean, it's not like I'm out of the water, it's like if we're all in the constant engagement, but I do feel like there's definitely a clarity that's
on how to deal with it, and
how to continue to master that that flow of energy and go longer. I mean, outside of that one little phase this year, it's basically been a full year of like complete celibacy, no ejaculation, no release.
Right.